The last two messages I spoke to you about Job, and I want to continue to look at Job this morning. You know, as I drive in my car and I put on the Bible and listen, even coming here this morning, I was so blessed by Job chapter 31, which I'll be looking at some stage. But I want to look at chapter 30 of the book of Job. And my topic is a bit strange. It is comparing the then with the now. Comparing the then with the now. There's so many things that we learn about Job. And you know, this was a man who went through the mill. A man who suffered. Suffered a lot. And last week we looked at Job as he looked back on his past life. He looked back on how he lived his life. He looked back on his goodness. You know, you have so many rich people, have money, and all they can think about is their money. All they can think about is to earn and accumulate and amass wealth, with no consideration of others. But here we have a rich man, richest man of the East, but he was a godly man. And last week we have seen how Job, although he had his riches, although he was wealthy, he was a man that considered the poor, considered the homeless, considered the destitute, supported the stranger, and everybody in the area know Job, because Job was a man that was godly. And we've been seeing this in the whole backdrop of Job now. Lost his wealth. He lost everything. He lost his son. He lost his wife, though not dead. But he lost all his riches, he lost his home, and Job was sitting on the rubbish heap, scraping his skin as boils and sores were all over him. And last week, we looked on Job as he reflected on his life. I was a man who was highly respected within society. I was a man who looked for the need of those people around me. I was a man, when I walked out in the street and the young men saw me, they hid themselves. People come to me for counsel and they speak, but the moment I got up and I speak, they remain quiet. But here am I now, right in this rubbish dump, right in the rubbish heap, scratching myself, filled with sores. The dogs would be around me. The rubbish heap, here I was, reflecting on my experience. What are you going through this morning? Your experience might not be that of Job. It might not be to that extent, but you could be going through some difficult situation. Difficulties is no evidence of bad relationship with God. Sometimes you go through something and you don't know why. Why am I going through this? Why is my experience so difficult? I cannot cope. I reach my tether, as some people might put it. I cannot bear this no longer. Job was there. He did not understand why he was going through this. And I stopped last week by looking at, he said, the young man, and Job 30 I'm looking at today, the young man that when I was walking on the street, they hid from me. They hid from me. And that's all chapter 29 tells us about these people. But when you come to chapter 30, it reveals something more about these young men. And I like the way chapter 30 started. It started with a conjunction. But now they mock me. The young men who hid from me for fear, who hid from me because of the reverence that they had, who look up to me, now they mock me. Do you have experiences of people who once were good to you, once respected you, once looked up to you, but now their attitude towards you, the way they communicate to you or relate to you, you cannot imagine the change in that. But now they mock me. Very, very short statement, but a statement that was filled with so much information. But now they mock me. Who are they? The young man. But Job went out to give us something more about these men, these young men. And verse 30 says, but now they mock me, men younger than I. Today this might not mean much, but in those days, to be an adult or an old man commands respect. The elderly were looked upon in society, highly respected. Their advice were looked into. Their advice were taken. Job was saying, now these people who are even scared of standing in my presence, now they mock me. They disdain him. But look at verse 1. But now they mock me, younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. Who am I being mocked by? Job was saying, these are young men who their fathers I would not even allow to look after my sheepdogs. Job was showing to us the depth that he has gone down to. He was showing us the level with which he was brought down to the point where young men whose fathers could not even look after my dogs were looking upon me with disdain, were mocking me. And he went further. Of what use was the strength of their hands to me? Look at verse 3. Haggard. Young men, he gave us a description of the people, the level, and he was bringing this out to show the level that he had actually reached, how low down he was. Because people like this, worse than the beggars on the street, Job was actually saying, what have I come to? That even this, the status and the level of these people to be looking down upon me, to say, look, you are below me. Haggard from want and hunger. Job was saying, when you look upon them, they were haggard. They were starving. They roamed the parched land in desolate wasteland at night. In the brush they gathered salt herbs, and their food was the root of the broom tree. What Job was saying, who am I being mocked by? Who am I being disdained by? People who were suffering from starvation. Young men who was haggard from hunger. Young men who roam the parched land night and day looking for food. And he talks about salt herbs. And salt herb was a common salad that was actually, they say it tastes like salt fish. But these were vegetables that were only eaten by the poor. Only the poor would eat these, so they would go around in these wasteland. It's almost like scavengers, in other words. There were the scavengers going around, searching in the desert for these things that people who were poverty-stricken would eat. Job said this was their food while they were going around. But these people still see Job as below him. Look where Job was coming from. He was coming from a man who was highly respected. That even the young men of the city was even scared to stand in his presence. The old men, it's as if they were tongue-tied. Remember last week I talked about the nobles and the rich people. They were even tongue-tied to even speak in Job's presence. But here Job was, from this lofty state, was thrown down below even the beggar on the street. That even the beggar on the street was looking on him with disdain. People who could not even find food to eat. And Job went on. And he talks about the broom brush that they eat. It said it's only on rare occasion the poor would use this food. Only on rare occasion. But these men were looking for this food so that they could eat. In verse 5, the first clause, it tells us that Job was cursed. They were cursing Job. They were banished from their fellow men. These are people who were banished. Society did not want them. They were ostracized. They were almost like lepers in those days. And to find himself being cursed and disdained and looked down upon by the lowest of the lowest, that just tells you how much Job has gone down to the lowest, the lowest strata in society. One thing, Job's mental state was intact. He was still mentally strong. And irrespective of what Job was going through, Job remained true to God. You know, sometimes we go through a little problem, little difficulty when compared with what Job is going through, had gone through. Very, very minute. And sometimes some people just walk away from God. I cannot serve God. I am not going to serve God. Sometimes people might not say it in words. They might not verbalize it. But in practice, they do that. These people, according to the second clause of verse 5, they were treated like thieves. They were banished from their fellow men. They shouted at as if they were thieves. When people see them, they would shout at us as if they were thieves. It's like, there are some, I don't know what it is like here, but back in Jamaica, sometimes when the mad men on the street or the mad people on the street are seen, the people would actually abuse them, physically abuse them. They disdain them. There were some parts in Jamaica, the area will come to me now. What they would do, they gather up all of the madmen, put them in a vehicle and send them to Montego Bay. We don't want you in this area. We don't want you you're not a part of our society. These are people, it's almost like having mad people who are on the street or poor people on the street cursing Job, cursing you. You are below me. show their mockery at Job. What did they do? How did they mock Job? Look at verses 9 to 11. The first clause of verse 9 tells us, and now their sons mock me in songs. They were making songs mockingly, using songs to mock Job. I have become like a byword among them. They detest me and keep their distance. Now, in the Bible we learn about the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan, the passage talks about this man who was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked. And along came the priest, and he just walked by on the other side. Along came the Levite, passed on the other side. And along came the Samaritan. And the Samaritan is like a half Jew and half Assyrian. And if you know the whole history behind that, is that Jews would have no dealing with Samaritans. If a Jew was walking up this street and they see a Samaritan, they would walk on the other side. They would not walk through a Samaritan city because they disdained them. And this was the sort of thing that Job was experiencing. He was being disdained by the worst people, quotation, here in society. And when we look at chapter 31, which we look at some other time, Job had every reason possible, if you want to look at it, to move away from God. He could find reasons. When you see his lifestyle and what he lived, he could find reasons. But to find himself get to the point where the worst people within society were detesting him. In the second clause of verse 9, it said they scorned him and walked far from him. The first clause of verse 10 said they abhor him. Second clause, they stood aloof from me. These are not nobles. These are not rich people. These are poverty-stricken young men. I want you to imagine, to make a similarity within our society, as I've said before. It's like walking on the street, going into town, and to see people sitting on begging or sitting, sleeping on cardboard boxes, etc. And to find those people disdaining you, making songs in mockery at you, don't want to walk close to you. Job went through it. What are you going through this morning? What are your experiences? How difficult is it? How harsh do you think God is? As you make a comparison of your life experience with that of Job. Look at verse 10 again. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. These are, as I emphasize and re-emphasize, it's like the mad, the destitute, the outcast people in society were spitting in the face of Job as he sat at that rubbish heap, I can put it like. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. Why? Verse 11 tells us. Job reflects and look at himself and says, why is it? Because God, the first clause of verse 11, God has removed his covering from him. Job said the only reason why this is happening because the covering and the protection that God has around me has been removed. One thing we can learn from this, every child of God is protected and is covered by God. You have a covering, my friend, a protection around you by God. And Job is saying, you're only able to do this. They can only do this because God has removed his covering from me. One thing we can learn from this is that the covering that God has around us are very, very important. The protection of God is something that we need. But Job recognized that that covering is removed. And when you read the previous verses, like in chapter 1, you would see that God did remove the covering without Job knowing. God didn't tell Job. But it was his experience that he was going through that he recognized that this is happening to me because God has removed his covering. Second clause of verse 11 said, Job said, God, you're afflicting me. I'm being afflicted by God. Now that God has unstrung my bow and afflicted me, they throw off restraint in my presence. Because of the affliction of God upon me, people throw off restraint. They don't hold back in spitting on me. They don't hold back in disdaining me. I can tell you there that sometimes, for reasons unknown, you will face difficulties. Many times we see difficulties and hardship within our lives as a result of sin. Not necessarily. Things not going right. Everything you try, things are just getting from bad to worse. Not necessarily. Here was a man that was spotless. He was a man that was perfect. He was a man that was godly. Yet God allowed him to suffer disdain, rejection, and affliction. I just want to finish in the next 4 minutes. What are the effects of the calamity on Job? In verses 16 to 18. Verse 16, the first clause, he said, he emptied his soul. His soul feels empty. He cried unto God. His soul feels empty. Job said, I feel trapped by my affliction. I cannot get out. I'm trying to break forth. I'm trying to find release. But there was no way of release. I am trapped. And sometimes you might feel trapped in your circumstances. You might feel trapped in the experience that you're going through. Job said in the second clause of verse 17, because of time, I just want to hit on these things. He was experiencing mental and emotional pain constantly. Not only was he experiencing physical pain, the boils, that was physical pain, but mentally and emotionally, the pain was constant. According to verse 17, second clause. In verse 20, I'm just rushing on. We see Job's plea to God. He cried to God but got no answer. And you might be praying, God, do this. No answer. Job said, I feel as if God was persecuting me. When I stand up, expecting God God to look up at me, the Bible says God barely glanced. He barely glanced at me. And Job did an assessment of his state. And he tells us more about Job in verses 26 following. More about him in verse 26. Job said, "Yet when I hope for good, evil is present." No, I'm not going to go back to verse 25. "Have not I wept for those in trouble?" What Job is actually saying, when I was in my good, prosperous state, have I not wept for those in trouble? In other words, I used to weep for people in trouble. Have not my soul grieved for the poor? So it's telling us, here was a man who had concern for the poor. He was a man who had concern for people who was in trouble. His soul wept for those who were in trouble. His soul grieved for the poor. Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. Evil came. When I looked for light, darkness. The churning inside of me never stops. The days of suffering confronts me. I go about blackened, not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and I cry for help. My skin grows black and peels off. My body burns with fever. Job was at the lowest possible depth. But he remained faithful to God. I want to close this morning by saying, whatever you might be experiencing, remain faithful to God. Remain true to God. Whatever you might be going through, it will not last forever. God, we sang this morning, is faithful. We might not understand some of the things, but God has a reason why we go through some things. And we're going to be seeing the end of Job. He was tested and proven. God wants to test you. God wants to make you the best person possible. God wants to bring out the true qualities within you. But in order to do that, you need to pass the test. This morning, Roxanne talks about her 3-year course. And in summary, the difficulties that she went through, she remained steadfast and she passed the course. God wants you to pass the course. God wants you to pass the test of time. God wants to make you the best person possible. So don't run away when you face difficulties. Don't blame God, but ask Him for strength so that you can overcome. May God bless you.